Good morning, Robert Brittan here, Brittan Vineyards, on a beautiful mid-August day. It's sunny, it's warm, perfect ideal conditions for maturing fruit. We are at that point now in the vineyard where we are actually starting the most critical part as far as wine is concerned, and that's really the maturing of the fruit itself. So 50 years of winemaking, 20 years here in Oregon of growing grapes and making wine on this site. I can tell you that I'm getting pretty excited about this vintage. A lot of really good potential, I think, from what's happened in the vineyard so far. So we're right at that key point where we like to talk about Veraison. That's the color change, essentially. And it's the point that signifies, you can see as a person, that the vine is in the process of maturing the seed. It's really starting to concentrate on how the plant can make this seed, this berry, attractive to a bird who's going to eat it and take the seed and deposit it someplace else. So here's a really good example of a of a Pinot Noir vineyard here in the heritage block. We're looking at the Pinot Noir at this point in here is probably a full 90% in Veraison, maybe 85% overall for the whole block. What we really have seen is the vines go from a total green characteristic to this kind of gray and then pinkish and then finally a dark color. What that really signifies is that the vine is in the process of maturing the seed itself, and that's what sort of starts the process of real sugar accumulation, and more importantly, the evolution of the phenolics and things in the vine that really give wine its texture and its flavors. So at this point, we really want the vine to be focused entirely on that process. We don't want to be growing any more leaves or shoots. We have enough leaves, we have enough shoots to ripen these clusters. So in this case here, because this site is very challenging to maturing fruit, we actually have the vines are completely shut down or almost completely shut down. Here's a vine where it's just really starting to shut down its growth. You'll notice that the growing tip, the last leaves that are coming out from the growing tip are actually below, and they will stop. And in fact, if you look at most of these growing tips, there's a leaf that is also slowing down. This one is completely stopped, it's dropped off. The tendrils, again, tendrils which are usually green and vibrant, have started to dry, and in fact they have dropped off on most of the vine, which means that the vine really is in its shut down, non-growing mode and completely focused on maturity. So let's take another look here in the heritage block at another row of grapes here, where you can see a little more variability in the Veraison process. So you can see clusters here where in fact we still have a lot of green berries. So this is kind of more typical of the point at which you really start to look very seriously. And in fact, it gives you some idea about the variability of ripening. And I think this is really important to Pinot Noir, in that there is a lot of variability within the cluster itself as to how mature each individual berry it is. And then especially on a cane-trained vineyard like this, between clusters, they've been evolving at a different rate. They came out at a different rate, they flowered at a different rate. So we're really looking at some variability which will catch up with harvest, so that when we harvest this grape, the clusters will be 100% color change, but there'll still be a little bit of variability. And I think that's one of the things that gives Pinot Noir its complexity of flavor. So I actually encourage that. At the same time, we will be walking through the vineyard now that we're at this point of color change and removing the clusters that are still green so that something like this, which was very late coming out, or here we actually have, you hear people talk about second crop. This was second crop that came out this year, and we will take that off so that in fact the vine can focus all of its energy from this point forward on that maturing cluster. So here we are in Chardonnay. This is block 25, one of the blocks that actually of Chardonnay, of our 4 blocks that actually ripens earlier, and it is well into Veraison at this point. We can tell those differences by looking predominantly at the difference in color change. This fruit that has been out in the sun and well exposed to the sun, starting to get a little bit of a yellow, almost kind of golden little hue to it, whereas these grapes that are later in developing, perhaps been in the shade a bit more, you know, they are still gray, green kind of in color. So color is a big indicator of Veraison and the point at which we're starting to really mature the seed here. But the biggest difference, of course, is tactile, right? Tactile. So you can feel this berry really softening up, as opposed to one that is still just pretty hard. I think another thing to really notice here in Brittan Vineyard is the size and shape of the vines. So Chardonnay can have very large clusters growing on very large vines. Here in our site, where we're really restricted by the depth of our soils, and also by the minerals in the soil, in this particular case, higher magnesium levels restricting the amount of uptake of potassium, you start to see the vines shutting down earlier. We have drip in here to establish the vines, but we don't irrigate. So we end up with much smaller vines. You can see this Chardonnay here is in fact almost completely shut down. As we mentioned before, the growing cluster, the growing tip here is pretty well gone. You can see the tendrils have dried and are at the point of falling off. This vine is basically shut down and completely focused on maturing that seed. Crop level on these vines right in here is about 1.5 tons per acre, very low for Chardonnay, which can easily handle 4 to 5 tons per acre. But it gives us that concentration and the structure of the vine, the structure of the wine that I get from the vine here at Brittan. All right, so here we have moved down to block 4, Syrah block, just to give you some idea of what the Syrah looks like at the beginning of Veraison. Now, remember the Pinot block and the Chardonnay block are actually much further along Veraison than the Syrah. We always pick the Syrah last. Here we're looking at a cluster of Syrah that's just beginning to change. So that's probably 3 or 4% at Veraison, where we were looking at probably closer to 80% in the Pinot lots. And in fact, here on this outside row between block 4 and block 5, here's a little bit of Pinot that's also grown on cordon. And you can see that the spur training gives you very small clusters, but the important thing is you can see here that the cluster is 100% in color change, whereas again in the Syrah it's not. Syrah, of course, you can easily tell the difference in the variety because of the size of the leaf, the shape of the leaf. We're going to talk about that at our little seminar on the 31st if you want to learn how to do what we call ampelography. That's the identification of varieties of vinifera based on the characteristics of the leaf and also the cluster, because here again you can see this Syrah cluster is very long and can be much bigger. Here at Brittan, because of the restrictions in the site, as we'll see both in Chardonnay and in Pinot, even the Syrah is held back by the high mineral content in the soil and by the restricted rooting depth that the plant has. So here we're looking at Syrah that's probably going to harvest around 2.5 tons per acre, whereas I think my previous experience of growing Syrah on much more fertile sites it's not uncommon to see Syrah 5 tons and above. This gives you a definite more concentration of flavor and a different expression of Syrah because it retains its acidity a little better than what we see perhaps in other growing sites. So this is Syrah at Brittan Vineyards in its very early stages of color change of Veraison. All right, let's walk into the Gestalt block here and talk just a little bit about the harvest in general, because I'm pretty stoked. This, if you look at the things that really create what I consider to be great vintages, you're looking at soil availability on these sites where we don't irrigate. You're looking at the amount of sunlight that we've gotten, the amount of heat. In this case, we've had a couple of pretty warm little bursts, but it's actually overall been pretty moderate. And for me on this site, we look at wind, and the wind this year coming off the Pacific Ocean and through the Van Duzer and up into this little part of the vineyard where we are right now has been what I would call very normal. In other words, we've had pretty good breezes. It's been cooling down well at night. So all those things I think have set us up for an extremely good 2025. Super excited to make wine. I am every single year. You would think after 50 years I would be getting tired of it. I am perhaps feeling a little bit like, yes, there is another vintage, but at the same time my curiosity is such that I want to know what this vintage is. So I'm actually really excited to find out what this growing conditions on this site has done for us. And at this point, my projections are the 25 vintage is going to be exceptional, if not at least very good. Hard to always say. So that's it from Brittan Vineyards. If you would like to spend a little more time with me to talk a little bit more about the wines, come by the tasting room or give me a ring and we can always try to set up something in the vineyard.